Okay, so in our last week's study, we determined that we should keep the law in its entirety. Now, that is to say, keeping the spirit of the law and understanding the letter of the law when applicable. And so in this week's lesson, we'll review a bit that we went over last week, and then we'll go over some of the more foundation, I want to say, how we approach the law, and then move on to some random cases at the end, demonstrating the breakdown of some random laws and its practical applications of them. So let's move on to reviewing a little bit what we went over last week. So why do we not discard the law? Why don't we just get rid of it, Well, that was because in Matthew, when Jesus was speaking, he didn't come to destroy the law, but to affirm it. He said that he didn't come to destroy it. Not one jot or tittle will pass away from the law until the earth passes away. So that's referring to Revelations, the end of the world. And last time I checked, we're still here. So until that point, it seems like the law must be pretty important, and we must follow it as much as we can. And so we also kind of discussed last week that not only did Jesus say that he didn't come to destroy the law of the prophets, but he also obeyed the law completely and perfectly. Or else, if Jesus didn't, then he would have been a sinner. And if he was a sinner, then he wouldn't have been a perfect sacrifice. And if he wasn't a perfect sacrifice, what is our religion that we follow, in a sense? Why are we worshiping someone who is a sinner? His sacrifice would have been pointless. So there's a lot of discussion there that we brought up last week over just that one verse and the concept of Jesus, in a sense. And then we also talked about the Hebrews passage that discussed the new covenant, and that almost everyone who brings up that verse normally says, oh, we're under the new covenant. We're not under the old law anymore. But when you actually get down to it and look at the verse and look at the context, especially in the Jeremiah passage, it says, what does the new covenant actually do? It just changes the location of the law from stone, written down, to the heart and mind. So it didn't get rid of it at all. We still have the law. So that argument also we went over for why we don't discard the law. But one of the stronger ones, I'd say, for arguments is that in the 2 Timothy passage, that it says, all scripture and the law is part of the Bible, is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instructions in righteousness. And so that means every law that there is in the Old Testament has some practical use for our life. Whether it be, for doctrine or reproof or correction, it has purpose, and we shouldn't just get rid of it because we don't understand it. Lastly, we discussed the concept of morality and the concepts of good and evil. Now, we actually discussed that first in the lesson, but if you get rid of the law completely, then we don't know how to behave, in a sense. You're back to evolutionary survival of the fittest, that do whatever profits you, that makes you do better in life at the expense of others. Now, that's why we have the problems we do today, because society doesn't know what is good and evil, and so that means anything that people want to do and enjoy doing must be good, in a sense. A lot of people just say, well, it's not hurting anybody, but at the same time, really doesn't matter if it's hurting someone, if there's no truly good or evil. And so we kind of discussed that last week, that you get rid of the law, you get rid of everything, in a sense. It's really hard to function in society. So this week, though, I want to go over a little bit of how should we view the law. When we come to the law, what should our mindset be, I guess you could say? And how should we not approach it? What are we trying to do, or getting away from the law, in a sense? That's kind of what I want to go over there. But how we should view it is that it's for our benefit. If we view that it's just negative and that we don't want to do it, then of course we're going to hate it. We're going to begrudgingly be trying to do the law if we do attempt it at all. Another thing we should understand that these laws aren't arbitrary. God didn't create them out of boredom just to make us suffer. No, he did them for our benefit, and we may not always see it, but it is. So I just want to look over some of the verses that kind of support some of those concepts. But I also want to go over the Romans passage that we want to understand that the law right there is spiritual. Now, what does that matter in a sense? One of the verses we went over last week is that we're not under the law in a sense, but we're under the Spirit. But the thing is, if we're, guided by the Spirit and the law is spiritual, okay, then we're still kind of obeying the law to a certain extent. So it's a little, I want to say redundant, but it has a wide scope that we might not see, and that's why it's spiritual. Now, in the Deuteronomy passage, it says, "And to keep the commandments of the Lord and his statutes, which I commanded you today for your good." So this is pretty clear. God is saying, these commandments, I've created them, I've laid them out today for your good. It's not so that we have to suffer. And again, in Proverbs 3, it says, "My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commandments, for length of days and long life and peace they will add to you." So that's pretty clear. If you want a long life, if you want to live a peaceful life, then by obedience to these laws, then you'll have that. You'll live a long and peaceful life. And who doesn't want a long and peaceful life? If you're searching for stress and if you're looking to die young, then sure, do the opposite of the law. Pick a law and do the opposite. That's how you do it. So that's another thing. When we're coming to the law, you want to be like, oh, we'll live a long life if we just obey it. In that same line, the Exodus passage that we actually have kind of been over on our previous lessons that we've been going through Exodus, but it says, "If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do whatever is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." So again, with this one, it's saying none of the diseases. You don't want to have the same diseases the Egyptians had? Now, half of that, I don't know, I'm kind of throwing out a number, but part of the diseases were, of course, just a curse that God, placed on the Egyptians. But there are many laws in the Old Testament that are also kind of related to sanitary or other issues of course, if you do this, then you're going to get a disease. So it's kind of split there. But in that same way, though, if you're obedient to the law, God will bless you in that way. So there's kind of two ways you can look at that, as obedience being blessed, or obedience and you won't get the same diseases, you could say. Now, in John 14:21, it says, "He who has my commandments and keeps them, it is he who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and manifest myself to him." So, this is pretty clear. Obedience to the law shows love towards the Father. And if you want to love God, then you obey the commandments. So, in kind of summary of those, how should we view the law? Well, it's for our benefit. If you want to live a long life, peaceful life in a sense, obedience. Also, love in action, I'd kind of say. That you're obeying the law, then you're showing your love. You're showing your worship. You're showing that you care about what God says and wants. And then lastly is spiritually. That we're not to be living under the flesh. And so that means we need to live under the Spirit in a sense. We're guided by the Spirit. We're guided by God. And that it has a very wide scope to application to our life. So these are the aspects I think we should, when we look at the law, we should have this in our mind, that we're thinking it's for our good. It's spiritual. It's love in action. But I was thinking, what ways do we not look at the Bible? And when I was thinking about that, I was thinking the passage in Genesis where Adam and Eve, they were given one law, okay? And how did they rationalize that, I guess you could say? And Eve, in the passage in Genesis 3:6, it says, so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree of desirable to make one wise, she took of it fruit and ate. Now, of course, Eve was tempted by Satan in the Garden of Eden, and he was saying, "Oh, this fruit is for your good. In a sense, you'll be like God. You'll be on the same playing field. God's lying to you in a sense." And so Eve, considered it, and she rationalized it, and she made some arguments, you could say here, good for food. And I was thinking about that. Oh, yeah, this fruit, it looks pretty good. It looks tasty. It's a fruit. It probably's got vitamin C. It's got some fiber, maybe some other nutrients in there. And so she's like, God said no, but it's a fruit, and I need to get my daily dose of vitamin C, so maybe I'll try it. And also, it's a fruit I've never tried. I'm kind of interested what it tastes like. So, because we don't really know what fruit exactly it is, but that is, in a sense, I was thinking, she's making an argument. She's like, oh, it's good for food. It's got that vitamin C. I need to get my nutrients. Also, make one wise. She's like, oh, I want to be intelligent, I want to, it would be cool be on the same playing field as God. I would kind of correlate this argument, kind of the same ones that people who do drugs make. Sometimes they'll say, oh, these drugs, they put me on this playing field with God. I'm a spiritual place, and I'm just only doing these drugs to be, closer to God. And I'm like, no, stop. That is not what drugs do. They do not get you closer to God. Where in the Bible does it say do drugs? No, nowhere. You will not find anywhere that it'll say do drugs. So they're trying to make some arguments. And so I was thinking along these lines also is, what other arguments could Adam and Eve, I guess you could say, made? I guess you could say, looking at our side, well, what about like other countries, you could say? If there's another country, they could be like, oh, but there's Eden of the East, that country, they say it's okay to eat this fruit. Or maybe their religion in that other country over there. Or maybe my friends over in this other place, not that there was any in the Eden, but hypothetically, they could have made those arguments of like, oh, other people, other cultures say it's okay. So I know what God told me to do. I know what the Bible says for me to do, but I'm going to disregard that because I think my friends or my society or their God or their culture is better than what my God says, in a sense. It really just goes down to that. And that's kind of the logical fallacies that people are making. Or they're just, looking at the half-truth, or biologically, and that I've kind of said before, like, oh, it has vitamin C, it has calories. And it's like, well, that's nice. It probably did. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that God said no. And so, since God said no, no matter how many antioxidants or healthy this fruit was, at the end of the day, we all know that because of that, it was the reason why death actually entered the world. But you can see how this is how we really do not want to come to the law. We don't want to start making excuses, really. That's what's happening here. We're making excuse after excuse of why we don't have to obey. And so, with that, I was thinking of another verse in James 4:11. You kind of have to read this one a few times to really kind of understand it, because it kind of throws you off on the wording a bit. But it says, "Do not speak evil of one another, brethren. He who speaks evil of a brother and judges his brother speaks evil of the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge." So, speaking evil of someone is kind of a little ambiguous, you could say. So I like to think of this as, okay, so lying, that's an easy one that we understand. Don't lie about someone else, don't lie about your friend. But if you do lie about someone else, then it's saying you're judging the law in a sense, because you're saying, well, I know it says that I shouldn't lie, and I'm lying about my brother, but I don't care, because I don't think that law matters. And so because you're lying, you're saying you're speaking evil of the law, you're judging the law and deciding that you don't have to be a doer of the law. So it's kind of clear there that at that point you've come to the law legally, and you're like, this one doesn't apply to me, and that's why I disobey it. And so that's another way we do not want to come to a law. We don't want to be a judge. We don't want to come legalistically and say, well, this one's for me, this one's for you, I don't have to obey these ones. We want to come to the law and say, well, why did God put this law here? Maybe it has some application. Is it good? Well, of course it's good. It's for our good. It's for our benefit. Now we just have to understand, why is it for our benefit, So that's what I'm saying. Wrong rationale of the law. We do not want to come to the law in these ways. Culturally, make cultural arguments of, oh, well, we're American, I'm American, and so society's changed from, 2,000 some odd years ago, back in the Bible times, right? People will say, well, it's been a long time, we don't have to obey those laws. It's like, we're American. No, that's not an argument. That doesn't matter what country you come from. It's what God says. What God says is what matters, not the culture, not society, not the government, not what your friends do. It's but what God says. And I also want to say, like, humanism, I guess you could say, or humanistically, trying to negate God's law by cherry picking the facts or half-truths, saying whatever you think is more important or supersedes what God thinks. That's really what humanism boils down to, lifting up of the human than the actual God, or legally. We don't want to just cherry pick the laws we want, or another way you could think of it, I want to just make it clear, is salvation through the law. We know, of course, that salvation is not through the law. The only way we can be saved is through the name of Jesus Christ. So we don't want to come across in that way either. And then also, finally, with the legally aspect too, is we don't want to come and say, God says this, and he's like, all right, I'll do the letter of the law, but I will have no heart behind it. And that's kind of what Jesus was complaining about the Pharisees, that they were obeying to the letter of the law. And of course, they actually even made some more laws, but they had no heart behind it. They just were doing it for pride. They wanted to look good. You of course get certain verses that says praying on the corner streets to get that good religious looking person. But, God doesn't care about whether, well, not necessarily he doesn't care, but he doesn't just want the letter of the law. He wants the spirit there also. So those are the ways we do not want to look at the law. We don't want to think in those terms, trying to get out of the law. Now, the law has much wider effect than we think. I want to kind of just put that out there as something you can think about. And I was thinking about that myself over some examples of, like, swearing. Okay, so we know that in the New Testament, I don't want to bring up the verses, I think we all should know that verse in a sense, that says, don't speak in crude language, don't take in vain talk, So with those laws, it says, okay, don't swear. So we can think of that very surface level and say the letter of the law and say, okay, take out these words from my vocabulary, okay? I don't know why that's too important. Words are just vibrations of sounds that communicate ideas, and maybe these swear words are negative ideas. What's so bad about a negative idea? You could really get legalistically here when you're thinking about that. But, and I know, not for myself that I've sworn, but I've read articles that say don't use these words in your speeches or your writings. It makes you sound less intelligent. I understand it's very difficult to actually work on that. But there are much wider effects than if you're actually working on it. Okay, so maybe you're a person who swears and you're truly working on it and you accomplish it. It took you a while. You're thinking now about what comes out of your mouth and how you say it and what you're saying. So the side effect, you could say, is self-control. Now, even though you were originally thinking about, okay, don't say these certain words, but you now also are conscious of what you're saying overall. And so you're gonna maybe make less mistakes over what you're talking about or what you're saying to people. And so that's where there are laws, and of course there are certain very specific laws, and we'll get to those specific laws, but they have just side effects, almost, you could say, wide effects that we aren't really conscious of unless we really think about it. If we dig into those laws and think about how they long-term make effect. And so that's kind of like, I was thinking too, is like for kids, you're teaching them like manners. Okay, so you could think of it in the exact same way of swearing, but in the opposite. So, okay, you teach your kids say please and thank you. Okay, well, that's surface level. Add these two vocabulary words to the kids' words that they'll use. Now, of course, that could just be very surface level, but in the same way, you're now teaching them in the long term in hopes that they now learn manners and that they're thankful and that they treat others well, and that they're thankful for the things they have, please and thank you. And so that's in the same way, just like that has a greater effect. You have certain small laws that you might think, oh, these are trivial, but they make a big difference. Let me jump around, actually. So, moving actually to another verse for kind of in a different line is in John 11:39 through 40. I was thinking about this argument that kind of along with the other wrong rationale that I was making before, but Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said to him, "Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God?" So, in the context of this, so Lazarus died, okay? And Martha and Mary, of course, they called Jesus to, but right before he died, he's like, oh, Lazarus is getting sick. Jesus procrastinated, but he's finally here now. And Jesus said, all right, well, move the stone. And Martha's like, whoa, he's been long dead. And she's like, it's gonna smell. Don't you know rigor mortis is setting in? Don't you know biology, in a sense, is what she's saying to him? And Jesus is like, I didn't ask for a biology lesson. I am the one who created biology. I created this universe. I don't need to be taught anything. So Jesus, says, just listen to what I said. You don't need to teach me anything. And so kind of with that concept, I was thinking about that, is obedience is not reliant upon understanding. You don't have to understand to obey. And that's the problem, is when we try to understand sometimes, we think we're right, and that's where we're back at trying to disregard certain laws. She's like, well, Lazarus is dead. He's pretty smelly right now. I'd rather not smell that, so I'm not going to obey. That's kind of what she's basically saying. But Jesus is like, no, you obey whether you understand it or not. And so this is kind of, I was thinking the same way as with the children of early childhood development, of course, is you don't just tell them, here's the house rules, or you could say the 10 Commandments, whatever rules you want to say, and say, okay, you only got to obey the ones you understand. you'll find out very quickly none of those rules are going to be obeyed. So when you're teaching them, you want to focus on obedience out of authority, but also that they're obeying you out of trust, that what you say for them to do is because it's for their good, and that you care for them, and that you want the best for them. And that's why you're imposing these rules that they might not understand. And so that's exactly the same way it is for God and us. We don't always know why God imposed certain rules for us, but we just gotta remember, the back of our head is God, and we are not, and God cares about us, and he wants everything for our good, in a sense, that those who believe him. So we gotta think in that sense. Maybe we don't understand, but we should probably still obey. So examples of the law, okay, finding the principle, that's really where you want to start out, and then see how it applies, and then kind of see the corrective nature. As I was saying, it has a much wider effect than we'd think, and so it has a corrective nature to our heart a lot of times. And so this verse in Deuteronomy, we went over last week a little bit. I want to kind of go over it again. It's just a tad bit slower. So the original law in Deuteronomy says, "You shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain." Okay, simple enough. I don't have an ox. Why do I care about this verse? Of course. So, nice for us, Paul explains it for us. We don't even have to think about it that much because we have verses. So this one, Timothy, the First Timothy passage says, "The labor is worthy of his wages." So he explains that original verse, the principle is you got to pay your workers, in a sense. He worked for you, therefore you should pay him. That's the principle. Pay your workers because he deserves it. You don't just get free labor. You don't get anything free, really, in this world. And that's why we pay our workers. So that's the principle. And here's how the law shows love, I guess you could say. That's the other aspect of the law. There's the process of find the law, find the principle, see how it demonstrates love, and then move forward to the corrective attitude and application. So in the Philippians passage, Paul is saying, "Now, you Philippians know also that in the beginnings of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church shared with me concerning giving and receiving, but you only. For even in the Thessalonica, you sent aid once and again for my necessities. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that abounds to your account. Indeed, I have all and abound. I am full, having received from Epaphroditus the things sent from you, a sweet-smelling aroma, an acceptable sacrifice, well-pleasing to God." So Paul right here is saying, you're the only church that shows that they care about me. In a sense, he's sending aid for his necessities. Other churches are just, getting a free ride of the gospel. Paul's going around and preaching the gospel and sermons and whatnot, but they're showing that they care. And he's saying this is well-pleasing to God. It's an acceptable sacrifice and showing love to him. And so this is how it is. You're paying your employees, if you have employees or whatnot, but you're doing that out of love. You care about your employees. You care about someone who works about you. You want to take care of them. And in that sense, Paul is showing that here. He's working for them and for many others, some for free in a sense, but this church is showing the love aspect of why you're, in a sense, paying or taking care of them. Now, what corrective attitude? By paying people, what does that do to you, in a sense, as you do that? And in 1 Timothy, it says, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." So the attitude of the heart that's corrected is greed. Love of money and showing concern to the workers. You give away your money, you're showing, in a sense, that you don't love your money so much that you just can't part with it. So as you give away your money, you're not going to love it as much, in a sense. Now, that's the thing. If you love it so much, giving away is going to be real hard for you. But as you do it, your heart will change, hopefully. Now, or you could work on your heart, obviously, first as you give away your money. Now, right here, you might not exactly see or understand, but I was working on another law verse, and this came to mind when I was working on this. And I know maybe I'm just trying to get an excuse to throw in some anime, but I thought it worked. So we'll watch this short little clip.
花子と散歩に行こう。ああ、ごめんよ。病院にどこだ？この辺の動物病院。どうする？飛んでいくか？走った方が早いか？どうする？神様、どうすれば？どうすれば？まさか。
Now, so with that anime, you see a character, you'd have to kind of see the entire show to see who or what type of person that guy is. But you see already with just the little animals there, the cats, that these weren't his cats. It didn't care. He could have just, heard a thump, looked at it, like, oh, well, it's, roadkill now. But no. He actually went over and had a breakdown almost. He really started to care about these random animals. And so this kind of with this verse or law that we'll look at are kind of thinking that even the smallest of animals, that you're showing compassion almost, that you're thinking about it. And so the actual law says if a bird nest happens to be before you along the way in any tree or on the ground with young ones or eggs, with the mother sitting on the young or on the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall surely let the mother go and take the young for yourself, that it may be well with you and that you may prolong your days. So, what is the principle? It's not so often you come across birds. Another example of some laws that you just like, well, I don't understand it, I'm just ignore it. Well, okay. That's why we want to look at the law and try and find the principle so we can think about it for us in our today's age. So the actual principle I would say with this verse is do not kill the producer, okay? So you're coming along the way, find a nest or some birds, mama bird, and some chicks or eggs, either way. But it says take the young or the eggs and not the mama bird. Well, that's the producer. So you don't want to get rid of them. And so you don't want to harm the producer because you know that if you do, they'll stop producing in a sense. So if you take the small next year, we've already demonstrated most likely the mama bird can make some more birds in a sense next year or whenever they do that. So this could be for multiple reasons. Some kind of give an argument of extinction. You don't want to accidentally cause an animal to go extinct. The context of the verse doesn't really say where the person is coming or going from, but we know that it's going from one destination to another destination. And so it could be a person who's, walking from one country to another and, they don't know if this bird is on the endangered species list, right? So you don't want to accidentally make a species go out of existence. I would say that's one aspect. But the main thing is not to harm the producer that, provides for society. Okay, so these are birds, you could eat them. So in the love aspect, you are showing that it's encouraging a spirit of kindness and compassion to the provider. And taking the love and the principle to an actual application is taxation almost with businesses. So businesses produce services and goods, and in this situation, it says don't take everything, okay? So don't take 100% of the business's profits or even itself. So if you tax a business at 100%, even 50%, that business will be gone pretty soon. It'll be gone tomorrow if the taxes are actually that high. Even at our recent, I think we were at 35% or somewhere pretty high up there for corporate taxes. Thankfully, we've lowered it to, I think, 21%, and that's why we get a lot of companies right now giving around $1,000 bonuses to their employees. Some are even upping their minimum wages for them. And so the thing is, why are they doing that? Well, because the government, you could say the person walking in this situation, is not taking everything. They're actually just taking a tiny bit. They're taking the eggs, they're taking the young, so that the producer can keep producing. And so in that sense, you don't want to make things so hard on the producers. Now, in this, the corrective behavior that is changed when you're doing this is greed. So you could take this in the physical sense that, okay, this person's walking around and he comes across some birds and he's like, okay, I'm real hungry and I'm going to eat everything. But really, you're going to eat an entire bird family? Do you need that? You're going to get a whole bird and some chicks or maybe some eggs? That's a lot of food. You're kind of being greedy. You're probably not even going to be able to finish all of that in one sitting. So he's kind of saying you're kind of working on that greedy aspect, that if you're only taking what you need, in this sense is God's like, okay, if you're hungry, take a snack, don't harm the bird family, okay, let them live, and then you'll be able to eat when you get to your destination, okay? So kind of that's how you look at these, okay? And that's why in some verses, as the previous verse with the ox, you might have an easy escape for not have to think too much, because Paul will explain certain verses, or maybe you'll find the explanation somewhere else. But some verses like this, you'll just have to stare at one verse and think about it for a while. You have to meditate on it, and it's because that's why we don't have any other verses that say exactly what this verse means. So you have to kind of come to that as your own conclusion. Let's move on to our final example of a verse before we end this lesson. So in Deuteronomy, you shall make tassels for yourself on the four corners of your outer garment with which you cover yourself. And you're like, well, what does that mean? What? Well, if you've ever seen a Jewish man, or they have little strings on the corner, I guess you could say tassels, of their clothes for their shirts or whatnot. And I've actually come across that when I was traveling to another country. I saw a family, all of them pretty much had it. And I'm like, I kind of want to talk to them about it. But you might be like, well, why? So what's the principle here? Well, in this verse, it really doesn't give you much. But if you do keep looking around, you find in Numbers, it talks about it. It says, remember all the commandments of the Lord and do them. That was the purpose. It says that's what these tassels are for. So that's the principle. Have a means for remembering the law, or you could make it more general, the Bible. And so the question is, do we have any ways to remember the law or Bible? You could say, well, there's some apps you could obviously apply onto your phone that'll remind you, read your daily devotion. Are you memorizing any verses? And to think about this verse, you want to think about the cultural aspect, not necessarily cultural aspect, but how the Israelites, they don't have, like we do, weekly church services. They had the tabernacle, sure, but they didn't actually attend it each week. They had a few sacrificial days that they would show up on, and they would do that. But they don't have access to a Bible. They had scrolls, and those are expensive, they're not super easy. So they had to, and that's why Jewish boys at the age of 13, when they have their bar mitzvah, they're supposed to have memorized actually a good portion of the first 5 books, I think. So they took it very like, okay, they have these tassels to help them memorize. I think they actually have certain things that you'd remember specifically, but they're really taking this seriously. They're trying to memorize, they're trying to find ways to remind themselves, or meditating on it. And so that's kind of the principle, underlining principle we want to think about. Do we have a way that we are trying to remember the Bible? Are we thinking about it, the law also? And I would say for us, if you're a church attender, then you kind of have that excuse of like, well, I'm going to church, so I have a way I'm acknowledging I need to remember the law, and I do that by going to church. And now that's just one way you could do it, and there are many other ways you can do it. Now, you don't have to do, I would say, the letter of the law, but I wouldn't say it would be wrong either. If you want to put tassels on your clothes, and if that truly helps you remember the law, then go ahead. But the main thing is, remember, spirit. We're looking at the spirit and the principle behind it, because that is what matters in application, not just the letter of the law. And so the love aspect of that, as remember, we kind of went over one of these verses before too, is if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, and just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in my love, or his love, I mean. So that's the thing, you obey, and that's showing love. Now, the heart change, okay? How does this change your heart? In John, that I was thinking about is, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as it is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. So the heart change is ambivalence and arrogance to the Bible or the law, in a sense. So are you the guy who says, oh, I don't need to go to church, I don't need to read my Bible, I already know everything? If that's you, then this law is for you. You need to have some way that you're trying to remember the law. You do need to read your Bible. You do need to come to church. You are a bit arrogant to say you don't need any of those. So that's the heart change that I would say the law is in application. And so you kind of see that process of pick a law, find the principle, see how it is showing love. In a sense, you are showing love to God in this situation, and there's corrective attitude of arrogance or ambivalence, and then as you apply it. Now this, I kind of was trying on my final slide to come up with a nice little image to show this, but the night before, I actually was debating over this slide if it's in the right order, and in a sense it's a debate of as the chicken or the egg come first, in a sense, but in this sense, pick a law. I would say this is process wise. Pick a law, find the principle, understand how is this showing love, and sometimes those can be similar. If you're not understanding the principle, think about how is it showing love. Sometimes when you think about that, then the principle will come after. You'll understand the principle, and then as you apply it, in a sense, there's a corrective attitude. Now that's the other question, is the corrective attitude first, or is the application first, or maybe they're simultaneous? And so that's the debate here, is what comes first. Some would say love. Of course, all the law boils down to love. But, in process-wise, if we're just trying to pick a law, that's why I have that first. Now, of course, if we're loving, then that should come first, and we'll obey the law, and the principles and corrective attitude and application comes after love, So I kind of have these up there just as I probably should have changed it, but this is what it is, okay? So we'll grow on that, but that will be it for this week's lesson, and next week, hopefully, we will start with the 10 Commandments, you could say. So remember, on the previous week, we talked that everything boils down to love. Jesus boiled it down to 2 laws that are love God and love the neighbor, but that was pretty much the summary of the 10 Commandments. And it kind of gets bigger and bigger, and 10 Commandments are the summary of the 613 laws. And so that's where we'll do it in that sense, that we'll look at the 10 Commandments one by one, and we'll try to find as many of those 600 laws that apply to those 10 Commandments. And so with that, we'll see you next week.